The sky brightened, the first rays of sunlight slipping over the hills, gently illuminating the majestic Vargas mansion. In the kitchen, Maria, the chef, adjusted the white apron to her navy blue dress. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air, awakening the entire house. Little Camila, still sleepy, looked at her mother with big, round, curious eyes, while Maria skillfully turned simple ingredients into excellent dishes. The dishes Maria prepares always have something special, as if they contained her soul. This did not go unnoticed by Alejandro Vargas, the owner of the mansion. "The food is amazing, Maria, as always," Alejandro said with a smile as he enjoyed the meal. Maria humbly returned the compliment, not realizing that the recognition was slowly being imprinted on someone else's heart. From afar, Isabel, Alejandro's elegant and always perfect wife, watched the scene. Her eyes did not express admiration like Alejandro's, but instead showed suspicion and concern. Alejandro's devotion to Maria worries Isabel, who begins to perceive the young chef as a potential threat. Although Maria remains completely oblivious to the growing tension in the family, Maria spends her days among pots and spices, always thinking of her daughter Camila, who plays under the watchful eye of her nanny in the garden. She dreams of a better future for Camila, very different from her life of hardship and sacrifice. When night fell, Maria returned to her small room, where Camila slept soundly. Meanwhile, Isabel was outside in the garden, her eyes looking toward Maria's room, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts. A flash of jealousy flashed in Isabel's eyes, signaling the beginning of a rivalry that Maria could not even imagine. The next morning, the Vargas mansion was still bustling as usual, but the atmosphere had changed. Isabel, normally calm and confident, now woke up with a heavy feeling difficult to name in her heart. She came downstairs dressed in her usual luxurious outfit, but her eyes were distant, lost in dark thoughts. In the kitchen, Maria is still hard at work, her hands flexible and precise as she prepares breakfast. Alejandro entered the kitchen, drawn by the sweet smell and a bright smile on his face. "You have a special gift, Maria. This taste reminds me of the happiest days of my childhood," Alejandro said, taking a slice of bread fresh from the oven. Maria smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mr. Alejandro. I'm glad you like it." Isabel, standing unnoticed in the doorway, watched the scene with growing unease. Every compliment from Alejandro was like a threat in her ears, and Maria's smile seemed to hide something. Isabel wondered if there was something more behind that humble and innocent appearance. In the days that followed, Isabel couldn't get the image of Alejandro praising Maria out of her head. Every smile, every kind word between them lit a fire of insecurity in her heart. Now Isabel feels that her position is threatened, and the worst thing is that the threat comes from a simple cook. The tension between Alejandro and Isabel begins to become evident. Alejandro becomes more and more fascinated by Maria's simplicity and devotion, and often spends time chatting with her about trivial matters, while Isabel feels increasingly isolated. The once harmonious relationship between the couple has now become an abyss of silence, more distant by the day. During the cold night, while Alejandro was in his study, Isabel was left alone in the large, empty room. Her thoughts revolved around the figure of Maria, the cook of the house. She realized that she could not allow this situation to continue. If she does not act soon, she will soon lose not only her husband's attention but also control of her home. "I need to do something before it is too late," Isabel murmured, her eyes shining with determination. If Maria was the source of her insecurities, then Isabel knew that she had to get rid of her. But it cannot happen so clearly or so suddenly as to raise suspicions. You need to act with intelligence and delicacy. Isabel has decided that she will begin to sabotage Maria's position little by little, with the ultimate goal of removing her from their lives once and for all. As Isabel outlines her plan, The emotional distance between her and Alejandro grows with Maria's silent presence. The atmosphere in the mansion became increasingly heavy, as if a storm was about to break out. Isabel stood in front of the window, looking out at the garden where Maria was playing with Camila, her eyes cold and calculating. The decision has been made. From this moment on, Maria will no longer be safe and her future will be clouded by the dark intentions lurking in Isabel's mind. The sun was barely rising over the horizon when Isabel woke up, her heart beating with a mix of anxiety and determination. She considers every detail of her plan, with the simple goal of eliminating Maria once and for all. But implementation requires precision, sophistication, and coldness. At the center of Isabel's plans was a family jewel, a tiara studded with emeralds and diamonds. This crown was not only extremely valuable, but also a status symbol, something Isabel knew Alexander treasured greatly. She plans to steal this item and pin the blame on Maria, a fatal blow that will not only destroy the young girl's reputation but put her in an irreparable situation. The next morning breakfast was served as usual. Alejandro, as always, could not stop praising the dishes prepared by Maria. "This soufflé is perfect. Maria never ceases to amaze me," said Alejandro with shining eyes as he looked at the plate in front of him. Isabel, keeping her cool, discreetly squeezed the handle of the teacup in her hand, feeling the heat of the liquid mix with the anger growing inside her. "Yes, she is very talented," Isabel smiled, hiding her true feelings with a neutral voice. But inside, she was already imagining the next step of her plan. By late morning everything was prepared. Isabel knew that with one delicate movement everything would be decided. Isabel walks over to the safe in Alejandro's office, where the family jewel is kept. She carefully opened the safe, carefully took out the crown, and admired its shine for a moment before wrapping it in a soft silk handkerchief. With the gem in her hand, she silently walked through the quiet halls of the Vargas mansion, her feet moving softly on the marble floors. She made her way towards the kitchen, where Maria was busy preparing lunch. Isabel finds the perfect moment and pretends to search for something in the pantry. In a quick but sophisticated moment, she cleverly hid the tiara behind one of the spice boxes in the cupboard, a place Maria was sure to reach, making her the prime suspect, and the jewel was discovered missing. Maria, immersed in her work, is unaware of what is going on around her. She was happily thinking of her daughter Camila playing in the garden. Although Maria's life was simple and challenging, it was a life she cherished. However, she did not expect that at that moment a trap would be set for her. Ready to destroy everything she had built, that afternoon, Isabel, with a calm but serious expression, called a member of the house staff. "Please come to the office and bring the family crown. Alejandro wants to see it," she said in a restrained voice and with a small smile. The employee quickly complied, but when she returned a few minutes later, she had a visibly worried expression on her face. "Madam, I did not find the crown in the safe," the employee reported nervously. Isabel, although happy in her heart, still sighed nervously, her expression full of anxiety. "You mean you searched carefully?" Isabel asked. "Yes, ma'am, I checked carefully, but it is not there," the employee replied with a trembling voice. "We need to notify Alejandro immediately," Isabel said, her tone clearly showing concern. Tension began to spread throughout the mansion. Maria, still oblivious to what was happening, continued her work, while Isabel, with a discreet smile, watched the development of the evil plan she had carefully orchestrated. Night fell, bringing with it the storm that Isabel had carefully calculated. The next morning, although the sun had barely risen, the Vargas mansion was already enveloped in a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. The disappearance of the pearl the night before had left everyone in the house in a state of suspicion and tension. The staff was summoned to the great hall, where Isabel with her usual elegance, had a look of deep concern and was clearly affected by the disappearance of the precious gem. "It is incredible that something so important to our family can mysteriously disappear," Isabel said, her voice slightly trembling, her eyes scanning each employee and lingering longer than on Maria. Maria stood at the end of the group, feeling a chill run down her spine as she noticed Isabel's scrutinizing eyes, but she did not understand why. An indescribable fear began to invade her heart. Alejandro, trying to remain calm, spoke with authority. "Everyone will be searched and the house will be thoroughly examined. This jewel is not just a mere item, it is part of our family history. Rest until I find it." The staff began searching every corner of the mansion, while Alejandro and Isabel stood in the living room to supervise. As the search entered the kitchen, Maria watched anxiously, her hands shaking, as the staff thoroughly searched the place. Suddenly, one of the spice boxes opened, and to everyone's surprise, the emerald and diamond crown fell to the floor with a loud clang. "Mr. Alejandro!" one of the staff shouted as he carefully picked up the gem. "I found it in the kitchen, in Maria's spice rack." An eerie silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Maria's heart beating wildly in her chest. Alejandro slowly approached, his eyes filled with suspicion and pain. He looked at the crown, then at Maria, who was pale and wide-eyed in fear and surprise. "How could?" Alejandro muttered, frustration evident in his voice. Maria, in shock, shook her head. She shook her head in despair. "I beg for mercy, Mr. Alejandro. Everyone here knows how dedicated I am, but the jewel was found in your workspace. Do you have anything to say?" Alejandro asked, his eyes filled with disbelief. "This is a mistake. I don't know how it got there. I will never touch that precious jewel," Maria pleaded, her voice shaking and tears filling her eyes. "Please believe me," she pleaded, but Alejandro closed his eyes, fighting the confusion and conflict in his mind. The evidence before him seemed undeniable and a difficult decision was clearly written on his face. "Maria, I have always considered you part of the family here, but I cannot ignore what is in front of me. I am sorry, but you must leave the mansion immediately," Alejandro said with a sigh, his expression sad and disappointed. His words were like a fatal blow, knocking Maria down. She felt her heart breaking, the pain of being falsely accused was unbearable. Trying to hold back her tears, Maria staggered out of the room, through the door of the villa with the weight of the unjust sentence weighing heavily on her shoulders. From afar, Isabel watched Maria's steps, a satisfied smile appearing on her face. Her plan had succeeded as expected. However, deep down, Isabel could not hide a small concern for Alejandro, who was showing signs that doubts had begun to arise. Alejandro sat alone in his office, the precious jewel on the desk in front of him. With his head in his hands, he felt insecure, as if something inside him was telling him there was more to this story than he could see. Meanwhile, Maria walked alone down a quiet street, unaware that she would face a future full of uncertainty. Were the days at the Vargas mansion really over? While Alejandro's usual tranquility is gone, the image of Maria leaving home in depression and humiliation constantly haunts his mind. The evidence against him was clear, but something inside him refused to accept that Maria was the culprit. The feeling of guilt and anxiety grew more and more, eroding Alejandro's inner peace. Sitting in his office, Alejandro found himself surrounded by suffocating doubt. He knew that to find peace he needed answers. At that moment, Alejandro decided to hire a private detective, who was able to discover what was hidden behind appearances. Roberto Mendez, a middle-aged man with a robust figure and sharp eyes, is renowned for his ability to solve the most complex cases. His reputation for uncovering hidden truths preceded him, and Alejandro knew that Roberto was the right person to investigate what really happened. I need you to uncover the truth about this crown theft, Alejandro said, looking Roberto straight in the eyes. I don't want you to simply follow the obvious evidence. I want you to look beyond what seems obvious and find the hidden truth. Roberto, who had faced many difficult cases throughout his career, noticed the seriousness and weight of responsibility in Alejandro's voice. Give it to me, Mr. Vargas. I will investigate every detail, every corner of this mansion. If anything else happens, I will find out, Roberto replied with a look of determination in his eyes. As Roberto begins his investigation, Maria, now outside the mansion, faces a life full of challenges and uncertainties. What she didn't know was that the truth was slowly being revealed and that the next few days would bring many unexpected changes. Maria is forced to move to a small house on the outskirts of the city, a modest place far from the luxury she is accustomed to in the Vargas mansion. But what is more painful than the material loss is the deep wound that injustice has left. Each day that passes is a struggle not to be overwhelmed by sadness and the shame of being considered a criminal. Maria tried to find comfort in her daughter Camila. Although she was young, she recognized the sadness hidden in her mother's eyes. Mom, why are you so sad? Camila asked, her innocent eyes looking up as she played with the simple toys. Maria, trying to hold back her tears, gently replied, Don't worry, my baby. I'm just tired, everything will be okay. Meanwhile, at the Vargas mansion, Roberto Mendez begins his investigation. He went through every corner of the mansion, spoke to the staff, and carefully examined the place where the pearl was found. Although Maria spent most of her time in the kitchen, there was something strange about the way the gem was discovered so easily. Roberto begins to suspect that perhaps the pearl was placed there deliberately. And slowly his thoughts turn to Isabel, who seems to have more reason to blame Maria. When interviewing Isabel, Roberto maintained a relaxed attitude, but his mind constantly paid attention to every detail and every change in her expression. Mrs. Isabel, can you tell me how you felt when you discovered the crown was missing? Roberto asked, his tone casual. I'm in shock, of course, Isabel replied, but Roberto detected a hint of tension in her voice. That jewel was a family heirloom, and to think that someone we trusted stole it is unbelievable. Roberto nodded, but he knew there was something not entirely sincere in her answer. He decided to investigate further by analyzing the schedules and movements of each person in the mansion on the day the crown disappeared. A small, seemingly insignificant detail could be the key to unraveling this mystery. As the investigation continues, the shadow of the past refuses to let Maria go. She tries to move forward, but the weight of injustice always pulls her back. Meanwhile, Roberto notices a slight discrepancy in the records of when the jewel was last seen in the safe and when it was discovered in the kitchen. This detail, although small, proves that the case is much more complicated than he thought. He begins to feel that he is facing a greater mystery, a truth that still remains hidden in the darkness of the Vargas mansion. However, one thing is certain, Roberto will not stop until he reveals everything. Roberto Mendez is famous for his ability to put together the most disparate pieces of a puzzle and turn them into a clear picture. As he proceeds to investigate Maria's life, he begins to realize that the case is much more complicated than a simple robbery. There is something bigger hidden in the shadows of the Vargas mansion, far beyond physical evil. Roberto's first step is to delve into Maria's past, a reserved woman who rarely spoke of her life before arriving at the villa. As he investigates, Roberto discovers that Maria was raised under mysterious circumstances. Her mother, Helena, was a shadowy figure who is only mentioned in passing in a few scattered documents. What caught Roberto's attention the most was Helena's disappearance shortly after Maria's birth. Leaving behind vague and speculative traces, Helena's name seems to be shrouded in mystery and the reason for her disappearance remains an unsolved enigma. Determined to clear things up, Roberto turns to old archives and talks to people who may have known Helena. In an old library he found a file that had been frozen for many years. This file, dated more than 20 years ago, mentions a connection between Helena and Alejandro Vargas. They have a relationship that is more than just a social friendship. It turns out that Elena is young Alejandro's great love. This discovery opens a new line of investigation for Roberto, and he knows that this complex story is just beginning to unfold. Roberto continues his investigation, determined to clarify the truth about whether Elena is Alejandro's great love and whether Maria is his daughter. His discoveries bring to light the possibility that Maria, without his knowledge, may not have been a simple employee of the Vargas mansion, but is actually Alejandro's biological daughter, the result of a love that he had buried deep in his memories, or that had been kept secret for other reasons. Roberto, overwhelmed by these discoveries, gradually realizes that the theft of the jewels has entangled him in a web of complex and painful relationships. Isabel, full of jealousy and envy, saw in Maria a threat long before the theft. The possibility that Maria might gain a legitimate place in Alejandro's life explains Isabel's determination to get rid of her. As Roberto reveals these secrets, Isabel begins to feel the weight of her actions. Although she tried to maintain a facade of indifference and control, a feeling of guilt constantly invaded her thoughts. Isabel knew she had done something terrible, but the fear of losing her place next to Alejandro prevented her from turning back. She could not allow Maria or anyone else to take what was hers. That night, Roberto returned to the Vargas mansion determined to confront Alejandro about the information he had discovered. As he walked down the long hallway leading to Alejandro's office, he felt the tension rising. He knew that what he was about to reveal could forever change the lives of everyone in this mansion. Entering the office, where Alejandro sat thoughtfully, Roberto without hesitation began to tell what he had discovered. "Mr. Vargas, what I am about to tell you could change everything about Maria and her mother Elena." Alejandro looked up with a confused look on his face. "What are you talking about, Roberto? What does Maria have to do with Elena?" Roberto considered his words carefully. "Elena is the great love of your youth, isn't she?" Alejandro was silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the past. "That's right. But that was a long time ago. Why does it matter now?" Roberto took a deep breath before answering, "Because Maria. She is Elena's daughter, and possibly your daughter." Roberto's words echoed like thunder in Alejandro's mind. Everything he knew, everything he had built in his life, was now being shaken by this revelation. Alejandro remained motionless, Roberto's words repeating in his head like distant thunder. "Maria is my daughter," he murmured, his voice cracking as if he were talking to himself, trying to process the truth that had just been revealed. He stood up from his chair and walked to the office window. From where he looked out onto the garden outside, the same garden where Maria used to play with Camila, unaware that he was very close to her biological father. Roberto remained silent, respectful of the whirlwind of emotions that enveloped Alejandro. Years of experience as a detective had taught him that there are times when words are not needed, only silence so that the truth can shine through on its own. "I never knew. Helena never told me," Alejandro said, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind lost in the memories of a love he had never quite gotten over. Elena was the love of his life, the woman he imagined a future with, until circumstances beyond his control separated them. Knowing that she was pregnant with his child, and without him knowing it, the pain and regret in Alejandro's heart was almost unbearable. He turned to Roberto, his eyes filled with sadness and determination. "We have to clear everything up," Alejandro said in a heavy but determined voice. He knew that his life and those around him were about to change forever, but that no longer mattered. The only thing left now is the truth, and Alejandro is determined to face it, no matter how painful it is. "Why didn't you tell me?" Why did you disappear without telling me you were pregnant? Alejandro muttered, a feeling of guilt filling his heart as he thought of the past. Roberto, calmly and professionally, replied, I still don't have an answer to that, Mr. Vargas. But what I discovered shows that Maria is without a doubt Elena's daughter and may have your child. Elena may have kept this secret because she thought it was best for Maria, but the real reason we may never know for sure. Alejandro felt a wave of guilt wash over him. In all the times he met Maria, she was always dedicated and always had a kind smile. He never imagined that she was part of his blood. And now, knowing that she had been unjustly humiliated and banished for a crime she had not committed, his heart was broken. Maria suffered because of me. Because I was not there to protect her, I was not there for her like a father should have been. She was treated like a criminal because of what Isabel accumulated, Alejandro said, his voice filled with pain. All this because I was not there when she needed me. Roberto, in a calm voice, advised, it is true that Maria has suffered unjustly, but there is still time to right this wrong, Mr. Vargas. She needs to know the truth and you have the chance to redeem yourself. Herself by becoming a part of her life from now on. Alejandro knew Roberto was right, but the thought of facing Maria, of having to look her in the eyes and reveal the truth filled him with fear and uncertainty. He wonders if Maria will be able to forgive him, the man who fired and accused her, who is actually her biological father. His emotions are like a roller coaster, never ending. The joy of finally finding his missing daughter, mixed with the pain of not being able to recognize her in the first place. Determined to correct his mistake, Alejandro turned to Roberto. I need to see her, Roberto. I need to talk to Maria, tell her the truth, and try to make up for lost time. Roberto nodded, relieved to see that Alejandro was ready to face the truth and take responsibility for the situation. I will find her, Mr. Vargas. She needs to hear this from you. Alejandro sat at his desk, holding an old photo of Elena in his hand, filled with new determination. He knows the road to regaining Maria's trust won't be easy. But he's determined to do everything he can to repair the ties that were unfairly severed. When dawn comes, it brings with it a different feeling, the halls of the Vargas mansion no longer looking serene and majestic but filled with palpable tension. Alejandro, in his office, prepares to face one of the most difficult conversations of his life. He had stayed up all night considering Roberto's discoveries about Maria and the terrible plot Isabel had hatched. Now the truth needs to be revealed. Isabel entered the office looking elegant and confident as always, but there was something in her appearance that caught people's attention, a hint of obvious nervousness. She knew Alejandro had been distant for the past few days. But she didn't understand why. As she looked at her husband's serious expression, the confusion in her heart increased. Do you want to talk to me? She asked, trying to keep a neutral tone, but the coldness in Alejandro's eyes made her feel uncomfortable. Alejandro looked up, his face full of contemplation. Yes, Isabel, we have a lot to discuss. He took a deep breath before continuing, choosing his words carefully. Roberto Mendez made some discoveries. And they changed everything. Isabel frowned, trying to understand what Alejandro meant. What discovery? What are you talking about? Alejandro stood up and walked slowly around the office, trying to remain calm. The tiara. Isabel. You quickly blamed Maria for the theft. Roberto investigated and what he found was more than just evidence. Isabel felt a chill run through her body, but she tried to remain calm. So, Alejandro, what did you find? She asked, her voice shaking. Alejandro walked over and looked directly at Isabel. He discovered the truth, Isabel. Mary was not the culprit. In fact, She was the victim of a cruel trap that you set for her out of jealousy and fear, only to get rid of her there. Isabel took a step back, her heart racing. This is ridiculous, Alejandro. You would never do that. I can't believe it. Alejandro, for the first time, revealed a pain he could no longer contain. Don't lie to me, Isabel. I know it was you who put the pearl in the kitchen to accuse Maria. And now I know why. You know Maria is my daughter, right? You know she is the fruit of my relationship with Elena, the great love of my life. Isabel's expression began to break, her eyes filled with tears and she began to tremble. The secret she tried to hide for so long was finally exposed. Alejandro, I just want to protect what is between us. I'm afraid she will take your heart from you, take you from me, she said haltingly. Alejandro, his voice full of anger but coldly, asked, protect what, Isabel? Protect a marriage built on lies. I love Elena, and you know it. But I never thought you were capable of doing something so despicable. Maria doesn't. You don't deserve to suffer like this. She was my daughter and you treated her like a criminal out of jealousy. Isabel's tears fell now and she fell to her knees, desperate. Alejandro, please. I just want you to keep loving me. I'm afraid of losing you, of losing everything. Alejandro, fighting the pain in his heart, shook his head slowly. I can't forgive you for what you did, Isabel. I can't keep living next to someone who has the ability to ruin the life of an innocent young girl out of jealousy and insecurity. You ruined and cancelled our marriage with my own hands, Isabel sobbed, but I know, there's nothing left. There's nothing I can do to fix it. Do you want me to leave this house, Alejandro? Alejandro had no other choice. Yes, Isabel. You have to leave here. This is no longer the place for you. Consider our marriage ending here, Alejandro said, his voice hard but full of pain. Isabel, tears rolling down her cheeks, stood up with difficulty, feelings of shame and sadness weighing heavily on her shoulders. She knew she had lost everything, not only Alejandro but the life she had built with him. Without another word, Isabel left the office, trembling with every step, as if the weight of her sins were dragging her down. She leaves the mansion, now a lonely and disgraced woman. Alejandro stood in the office, staring at the space where Isabel had just left. He knows the road ahead will be full of difficulties, but he is determined to correct his mistakes. Maria needs to know the truth and he will do everything he can to make amends and become the father she deserves. The sky was cloudy as Maria walked hesitantly towards the Vargas mansion. Alejandro's call left her confused and worried. Ever since she was kicked out of the mansion, she had never thought about returning, but something in Alejandro's voice prompted her to go back. It was an urgency and sincerity she had never heard before. As she entered the mansion's gates, painful memories flooded back to her, people's disdainful glances, unfounded accusations, and humiliation made her leave heartbroken. But something inside Maria pushed her forward, to hear what Alejandro had to say. Alejandro was waiting for her in the living room, where he had accused her a few weeks ago. But this time, his face looked completely different, older, as if the weight of his recent discoveries had etched lines of pain and regret into his face. Maria, thank you for coming, Alejandro said, his voice low and hoarse, full of emotion. He gestured for her to sit down, but Maria remained still, her body tense, ready for any possible humiliation. Mr. Alejandro, why did you call me here? Maria asked, her voice determined despite her inner turmoil. Alejandro sighed, knowing that the words he was about to say would change everything. I owe you an apology, but words are not enough to express my remorse. What I did to you is unforgivable. I accused you of something you did not commit, yes, based on a lie. Today is more than an apology. Maria frowned, not quite understanding where the conversation was going. "I don't understand, Mr. Alejandro." Alejandro looked into Maria's sad but determined eyes, a look she had never seen before. "The truth is, you are not just a servant of this house. You are my daughter." The world seemed to crumble beneath Maria's feet, a storm of emotions invading her mind. "Your daughter," she repeated. As if the words had no meaning, Alejandro nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yes, Maria. Your mother, Elena, was the great love of my life. We broke up before I knew she was pregnant. I never knew you existed until now. And all this time, the last time, you were so close that I didn't know you were my daughter." Maria fell silent, tears beginning to run down her cheeks. The feeling was too difficult to accept. The man who accused her, humiliated her, and fired her was actually her biological father. Shock, pain, and relief mixed together in her heart, creating a whirlwind of emotions she could barely control. "Why are you telling me this now?" Maria tried to ask, her voice shaking, because she couldn't live knowing that her daughter had suffered so much because of her. Alejandro replied, moving closer. "I know this is hard to accept, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But please, Maria, give me a chance to repair the damage I've caused, to become a father that you've never been able to do." Maria feels torn. A part of her wanted to run away from the pain of knowing that all the suffering she faced was caused by someone who was supposed to protect her. But a deeper part of her longed for the love and protection of a father she never knew. I don't know," Maria said, her voice breaking. "Too much information to take in. I was humiliated, treated like a criminal, and now you say you're my father. How can I just accept that, Alejandro?" His eyes filled with tears, raised his hand to her. "I understand, Maria. I know I hurt you terribly, but now that I'm here, please let me be a part of your life, so I can have a chance to right the wrongs of the past. I promise you, I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Maria looked at Alejandro's outstretched hand. For the first time since she entered the mansion, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be another future for her, a future where she wouldn't have to face the world alone. Tears rolling down her cheeks, she finally stepped forward and took Alejandro's hand. "I'll try," she whispered, her voice breaking. Alejandro felt a deep relief and gratitude and hugged Maria tightly. Hugging each other, they cried together, releasing the accumulated pain but also planting seeds of new hope. That hug marked the beginning of a new stage in their lives. The road ahead will be full of challenges and wounds to heal, but now, father and son are together, ready to face whatever comes. The next morning, the soft sunlight illuminated the vast garden of the Vargas mansion. But for Maria, returning to this place brought with it countless mixed emotions. As she made her majestic entrance, this time not as an employee, but as a legitimate heir, she carried an indescribable weight, the weight of reconciliation, forgiveness and hope for a new future. Maria took the hand of little Camila, whose curious eyes absorbed every detail of the luxury of the Vargas mansion. Maria still has not gotten used to the idea of being Alejandro Vargas' daughter. The weeks since the truth was revealed have been an emotional journey. On one hand, she was relieved to finally understand her origins. But on the other hand, the painful memories of her humiliating past and unfair accusations were still fresh in her mind. Still, Maria is determined to move forward, for herself and for Camila. Alejandro, determined to make Maria's transition as easy as possible, prepared a special room for her and Camila, decorated with love and attention to detail. He strives to create an environment where they feel welcome and safe. He knows that rebuilding the father-son relationship will take time, but he is willing to do whatever it takes. On the first night, as the family ate at the big table, Maria felt the weight of her new situation. Now her life is surrounded by food served by other employees, the luxurious environment completely contrasting with the simplicity she is used to. Noticing Maria's discomfort, Alejandro tries to calm the situation with a pleasant conversation with Camila. "Do you want to play in the garden? There are many interesting places here, I think you will like it," Alejandro said, trying to create a bond with his niece. Camila, with a shy smile, nodded, "Yes, Grandpa. The garden is beautiful. Can I play there tomorrow?" Alejandro smiled, joy filling his heart, a joy he had not felt in a long time. "Of course, honey. You can play as much as you want." Maria watched the interaction between Alejandro and Camila with mixed feelings. Alejandro as a grandfather, something she never imagined Camila would have. However, there are still insecurities in her heart. The transition from chef to heiress is not easy, and her past continues to haunt her, bringing with it the shadow of disapproving glances from the other employees, who, although they try to hide it, cannot get over it. Maria knows that to many people she is still just a young chef who has risen through the ranks too quickly. Alejandro, aware of Maria's difficulties, tries to be by her side whenever possible, helping her connect with her roots. Those moments were precious to both of them, an opportunity to heal the wounds caused by time and circumstances. One afternoon, as Alejandro and Maria walked through the garden and watched Camila play, Alejandro said gently but firmly, "I know it won't be easy for you to adjust to this new life, but I want you to know that I am always here and I will always be with you. I'm not perfect, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'll do everything I can to fix them." Maria stopped and looked at her father. She felt the sincerity in his words. "Dad, I don't know," she said, calling him Dad for the first time. "Dad wants us to have a real relationship too, but you need time." Alejandro nodded, respecting the space Maria requested. "Clara, we have all the time in the world now." While the relationship between father and daughter slowly strengthens, Camila, for her part, blossoms in Alejandro's presence. The role of grandfather gave her a security she had never known. Camila's laughter filled the mansion, bringing a freshness and joy they hadn't felt in a long time. However, the adjustment is not without its challenges. Maria struggled to find her place in the house, not knowing exactly where she fit in the eyes of the staff who were once her colleagues and now saw her as their boss. She also has to deal with the memory of what Isabel did. Although Isabel had left the mansion, the shadow of that action still weighed heavily on Maria. However, with each passing day, the bond between Maria, Camila, and Alejandro grows stronger, with small but meaningful gestures, like when Alejandro taught Camila to ride a bike in the garden, or when Maria and Alejandro discuss plans for the future. They begin to build a new family. In the evenings at dusk, Maria, Alejandro, and Camila would sit on the terrace, laughing and talking like a family, learning and loving one another. They know there is a long way to go, but they also know that together they can face anything. The Vargas Mansion, once a place of much suffering and intrigue, is now beginning to transform into a home where love and understanding can finally blossom. The newfound tranquility at the Vargas Mansion begins to show cracks the morning Isabel returns. The peace, though short-lived, brought relief to everyone, especially Maria, who finally began to feel comfortable in her new life. But that feeling of peace did not last long. Isabel suddenly appeared at the door of the villa, her face marked by sleepless nights and desperation in her eyes. There was still a certain pride in her walk, a mask she used to hide the desperation that was eating away at her insides. Isabel is willing to do anything to regain her position as lady of the mansion and, above all, to win Alejandro back. Alejandro's eyes showed concern when Isabel, uninvited, entered the mansion as if she had never left. She ignored the staff's questioning and headed straight to the room where Alejandro and Maria were discussing some details about the property. They both turned to her. I need to talk to you, Isabel said, her tone firm. Alejandro stood up and his surprise quickly turned to coldness. Isabel, you are no longer welcome here. We have discussed this. Isabel ignored his words, her eyes fixed on Maria, who was trying to remain calm. So it's true, Isabel smiled wryly, you really did let this woman take my place. Isabel, stop, Alejandro interrupted in a firm voice. You have no place in this house anymore. You made your choice and now you have to face the consequences. Isabel scoffed, but her voice held bitterness. Do you think you can get rid of me that easily, Alejandro? I've been your wife for many years, and you just gave it all to her. She turned to look at Maria with hatred in her eyes, but Maria stood her ground, even though fear was eating her up inside. Alejandro stepped forward, protecting Maria. It's over between us, Isabel, and I won't let you bring any more pain to this house. If necessary, I'll call the police. Realizing that direct confrontation wouldn't work, Isabel stepped back, pretending to be calm. I don't want to fight, Alejandro. I just want what's mine, and don't worry, I won't do anything rash. With those enigmatic words, she turned to leave, but not before giving Maria one last contemptuous look. Although Isabel's words sounded like surrender, Alejandro was not fooled. He knew that Isabel was a dangerous woman and she did not. Her obsession with getting Alejandro back can lead her to do anything. Therefore, she decided to cite Roberto Mendez, who was instrumental in discovering the truth about Maria. Roberto agrees to keep a close eye on Isabel. Meanwhile, Isabel begins to infiltrate the family's life in a subtle way, trying to regain the trust of her former allies in the mansion. She knows that to succeed in her new plan she will have to act in the dark, manipulating the situation so that Maria is once again in a vulnerable position. She begins to sow doubts among the staff, insinuating that Maria is not as innocent as she seems and that her promotion is in doubt. Isabel believes Alejandro will soon realize he made a mistake choosing Maria. Although Isabel's words were only whispers, they quickly spread, creating an atmosphere of suspicion. Maria, aware of the weight of Isabel's presence as a constant shadow, knew Isabel would not give up easily. Camila's fear for her safety keeps her on her toes. However, Maria has changed too. She is no longer a shy and insecure young woman, willing to accept injustice. She is now a firm mother, a woman with much to protect. Alejandro, aware of Isabel's actions, tries to calm Maria. I'm here, daughter. I won't let him hurt us again. Roberto is watching everything and we will get through this together. Alejandro's words comforted Maria, but she knew the battle was far from over. Isabel is an unbreakable enemy and Maria will need to be stronger than ever to protect her new life. From the garden of the Vargas mansion, Isabel looked up at the second-floor window, where Maria and Camila were playing together, her eyes filled with determination. In her twisted mind, Isabel has only one goal, to destroy Maria and take back what she believes is hers. Everyone in the Vargas mansion felt the rising tension. They know that nothing will ever be the same as before the real battle between Isabel and Alejandro's new family begins. The outcome of this war will forever change the fate of everyone involved. One cloudy morning over the Vargas mansion, as if the sky itself sensed danger, Isabel put her final plan into action. She believes that by breaking into Alejandro's office and manipulating some financial information, she can force him to reconsider and return to her. But when Isabel entered the office she was shocked to see Alejandro and Roberto already waiting for her. Isabel, Alejandro said in a determined but tired voice, your game is over. Isabel's face was pale, her hands shaking. I just wanted to fix things, Alejandro. I did it all for us. Roberto, standing next to Alejandro, handed Isabel a folder. This is a record of your efforts to manipulate the family accounts. You're not here to fix anything, Isabel. You're here to destroy what's left. Isabel finds herself cornered. She removed her mask of innocence and the desperation in her eyes was replaced by cold determination. You will never catch me, Alejandro. I did what I did because you created me. You betrayed me, you humiliated me. No, Isabel, Alejandro replied in a deeply sad voice. You destroyed it all yourself. You threw away what could have been love, what could have been a life with me, out of greed and jealousy. At that moment, the policeman Roberto had warned about entered the office to arrest Isabel. She resisted, screamed, but was eventually taken away, knowing it was all over. At Isabel's trial, the whole truth comes out. In her testimony, Isabel finally confesses that she never really loved Alejandro. Her only motivation is the Vargas fortune. She admits to having married Alejandro only for power and money, and that every act of love she showed was just part of a plan to secure her position in the mansion. But the most shocking revelation comes not from Isabel but from Alejandro. At the trial, he finally shared a secret he had kept for a long time. About his serious health condition. Alejandro knows that he does not have much time left and is determined to do the right thing before it is too late. The revelation about his health caused great sadness at the trial, but it also shed light on his apparent intentions. Alejandro announced that most of his fortune will be donated to charities to help disadvantaged children and support single mothers, in memory of Elena and her sacrifice for Maria. For Maria and Camila, Alejandro has ensured a comfortable life, but without excesses. He wanted them to live a simple life, honoring the values that Maria always carried: honesty, hard work and love of family. The mansion, once a place of so much suffering and redemption, has now become a true home. Although physically more fragile, Alejandro is surrounded by the love of Maria and Camila. They sat together in the garden, watching the sunset, knowing that, against all odds, they had found something more valuable than any possession, the truth and love that now united them as a true family. The end of the story is not only the fall of Isabel or the change of Alejandro, but also the profound transformation of all the members of the family. Maria, Alejandro and Camila are ready to face the future knowing that whatever happens, they will always be together. And the true treasure of their lives is not material wealth, but the love and lessons they have learned.